All right, we're going to get started here today. Thank you so much for joining us on Edinburgh University's YouTube today. We have a special presentation for Women's History Month that also is a nice transition from Black History Month too. Today we are going to be re-airing one of our presentations from our Diversity Dialogue series, which is a discussion on self-care for BIPOC women, Black, Indigenous, people of color women. Today we have Angelicus Braggins, who's an Edinburgh grad. She's here today to be the face of the video. She was featured in the fall. She's also going to be here to answer questions if we have any that come through. So if we have people that want to join the Zoom meeting, that link is in the description. And also you can submit your questions on the YouTube channel as well. We are going to be taking a look at the importance of self-care for women of color. So I wanted to welcome Angelica to our presentation today. So welcome Angelica.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me again.
So for the Erie folks out here, Angelica was one of Erie's 40 under 40 for 2020 from the Erie Reader. She's one of the founding members of Erie's Black Wall Street and a fierce, relentless advocate for equity. She also serves as a vocational rehabilitation counselor at the Bureau of Blindness and Visual Services. The other individual you will see on this video, actually there's two more. We have Dr. Prabhu from Edinburgh Social Work Department. Her teaching and research focuses on issues related to intersectionality, diversity and inequity, trauma exposure, and resilience. Her advocacy efforts focus on centering experiences of those who experience marginalization and continue to lead the fight for equity. And also, towards the tail end of this video, we have Haley Atkins from the Gehring Health Center, who is one of the liaisons with our counseling program for students. And she will be talking about some self-care techniques and some things that are available for students on campus and how you can promote self-care and getting the help you need when you're on campus. So Angelica's here to answer any questions we have at the end of the video. I'm going to get set up right now and share the screen. Like I said, this is a re-airing from our broadcast in the fall. But as you'll notice, and as we'll mention continually, these self-care techniques are good for throughout the entire year, whether it's during the COVID-19 pandemic or beyond. So thank you very much again for joining us. The video is about an hour and 20 minutes. So if you can join us for the entire thing, great. If not, the entire recording is available on YouTube, so you can watch that as well. So we're gonna get started here now.
Thank you, Chris. I'm really excited to be here. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. And I'm grateful that you've made this to give thanks to all the Black, Indigenous, Latinx, people of color, cisgender people, but also transgender, gender expansive people, people who fought for queer rights and civil rights and immigration rights and women's rights, because we would not be here sitting and having this discussion if it weren't for the efforts that they've put in to make this possible. And we just continue to do the work for equity and against oppression. So just acknowledgement for all that has made this possible. I also want to thank Dr. Terence Mitchell, who invited us here, and the Center for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. This is an important conversation, and I'm grateful for the space that we have here for that. And I think the panelists and I were actually talking about how, while this discussion is titled A Discussion on Self-Care for BIPOC Women, we are obviously not represented or representative, or cannot speak for all BIPOC women. We come with our own intersections of experiences. I'm a Indian woman who grew up and was brought up in Mumbai and I've immigrated to the US. I've had the privilege of an English language education, higher education in the US, and I'm now pretty strongly a part of the American middle class, however fickle that might be. Um, I also have only been able to make it here because uh, education was subsidized for girls in India, for cisgender girls in India. Um, I grew up with a lot of in a lot of poverty, with domestic violence, and um, I've had a lot of people model for me, and I'm hoping that in having this discussion, we can share. I can pass along what I have received very gracefully. So I'm what the discussions we have today might not resonate with everybody, but I hope that there'll be something that everyone can take away from it. So can I pass the mic to you?
Hi, my name is Angelicus Braggins. I am an alumni of Edinburgh University. I am a Black cisgender lesbian is what I would identify as. And I'm really just grateful to be a part of this conversation with all of you guys and just kind of share my perspective on self-care and how it affects me, like Shraddha previously said, which is as a Black woman, I have a unique experience that is my own. I want to thank Dr. Terrence as well for asking us all, getting us all together just to kind of have this presentation, because I think during a time like COVID, it is very important to take care of yourself until we kind of get out of this little mess. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Chris, Shraddha, and Haley for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. And I'm super excited to just kind of dive in with you guys.
And last but not least, we will go over to Haley Atkins from the McGarry Health Center.
Hi guys, I am a licensed social worker and I'm also an alumni of Edinburgh University, and I've worked with a variety of populations from veterans to inmates to geriatrics. And I'm just going to be providing you guys some resources and information today about how the McGarry Health and Wellness Center can be helpful for students and what we have available.
Thank you, Haley. Kristen, video.
All right, so next after that, welcome to our panelists, Angelica, Haley, and Shraddha. Before we go to the heart of our discussion, we're going to be playing a short little video about radical self-care from Angela Davis. So give us a second to set that up. Thanks again for everybody who is attending this. Like our panelists said, most of the focus is going to be on BIPOC women, but Haley's here because she handles all sorts of self-care promotion and all sorts of mental health services. So a lot of things that you're going to learn about today can be applied to anybody. This is just their specialty and kind of an important topic that we're going to talk about here today. So I'm going to get to the video and hopefully it cooperates.
began to practice yoga and meditation in the 70s. It inspired many people, including unions and Bobby Deal, to join that practice. I think they did a little bit of it, but I think that movement would have been very different had we understood the importance of that kind of self-care. Personally, I started practicing yoga and meditation when I was in jail. But it was more of an individual practice. Later, I had to recognize the importance of emphasizing the collective character of that work of the self. Well, it means that we're able to bring our entire selves into the movement. It means that we incorporate into our work as activists ways of acknowledging and hopefully also moving beyond trauma. It means a holistic approach. I think longevity is important, and not simply individual longevity. It is equally important to recognize that as we develop our movement today, we're creating a terrain for the emergence of new activists. And what we do today has an impact on what younger people will be able to see tomorrow. I think we have to imagine ourselves as connected to people who came before us and to those who will come after us. Black people all over the world have been subjected to the most unimaginable forms of violence, slavery, torture. But at the same time, and this is what Black people have offered the world, we've also produced beauty, music, and art. And I think that the self-care that gets produced by Black people recognizes the connection between struggle and art and beauty and the imagination. It's very dangerous. It's very dangerous not to recognize that as we struggle, we're attempting to presage the world to come. And the world to come should be one in which we acknowledge the collectivity and connections and relations and joy. And if we don't start practicing collective self-care now, there's no way to imagine, much less reach a time of freedom.
Right. Thank you for watching that. That was the legendary American social activist Angela Davis. For those of you that might have had difficulty watching the video or if there were technical difficulties, I'm going to post the video, the link to that video in the comments on YouTube, so you can go ahead and watch it. And thanks to the Afropunk Network for allowing us to share that video. From there, we will go to Dr. Prabhu, who's going to lead the discussion with our panelists, Angelica and Haley. So welcome back, Dr. Prabhu.
Thank you. I must say there's nothing as powerful as listening to her. So I'm glad we started with her and her wise words and insights. So I'd really like to kind of hear your thoughts about the practice of self-care and the importance of it.
Absolutely. So for me, self-care, and I will say that although I was practicing self-care before I got to this point, COVID really kind of hit me in the face with, you need to self-care, like you need to take care of yourself. And the one thing that I actually learned about self-care as I was doing it is that it is for everyone. Sometimes when we talk about self-care, we talk about it in regards to elite things like going to the spa and going on a ski trip, these big events that cost an immense amount of money that the majority of Americans just don't have, especially people of color. And I think that what we have to realize about self-care is that it is definitely something that you can find different levels of it to do, whether it be reading a book, walking through the park. It is not for a specific group of people. It should be and is for everyone. The other thing I kind of want to point out about self-care, especially talking about Black and brown communities, especially, is the immense need for it. We, statistically in America, we tend to have lower paying jobs. We have to work a little harder at those jobs. We're the essential workers that COVID has revealed. And those essential workers tend to work those longer hours. So the other thing about self-care that I do kind of really want to point out to everyone is, and this is my opinion, we're going to start my opinion, is that the lower you are in class and the less economically sound you are, I would say the more you do need self-care. Just because your life, and I can speak from experience being a college student, working, having to pay for school, I needed self-care the most during those times. So I think those are the two biggest things I would say is my basic perspective on self-care.
And I think what you shared in terms of the intersections of race and class and gender, and the more cumulative disadvantages you have, the harder it is to make that time and space, and the more necessary it is, absolutely. And I think that is also why Audre Lorde and Angela Davis speak of self-care as radical, because it is radical in that we are honoring ourselves and our needs, irrespective of what the general and the dominant society expect of us and say to us, communicate to us explicitly and implicitly. I was wondering what it might perhaps be helpful to kind of think about what self-care means though. What does it mean spiritually, emotionally, physically? What is self-care?
So I guess I can't give you a technical term, but I'll give you my term of self-care, which is, for me, self-care is it's kind of like recharging yourself is what I would say. So it's the same thing you do with your cell phone. When you get to 10%, it has to rest and it has to be plugged in. If you use it excessively, it's just going to continue to drain the battery. It'll never get to its full capacity. And that's how I view my self-care. When I get to the point where I feel like I can't think straight, I am tired, I am exhausted, self-care to me is taking that time, whether it be 5 minutes or whether it be, for me, 3 hours on the golf course, taking that time to process not only what's happening, but and to some extent actually disconnect and say that it's okay for me to not constantly, in the lingo of how I talk, it's not okay to constantly grind all the time, because you will grind yourself into the ground. So when I say self-care, it is to recharge yourself, the action of recharging yourself, whether it be, like I said, taking a walk, reading a book. Some people can recharge themselves by watching TV. That's my thing, because I can disconnect from kind of what's going on in the real world and worry about these imaginary problems that are on TV instead. So for me, that's what self-care is.
It sounds, I'm sure a lot of people can identify with all of those various forms of self-care and disconnecting from technology and from the constant news cycle. But I think that ties in really well in regard to what you described as the grind, the notion that we are only valuable as long as we are producing. And I think radical self-care is challenging that notion that our worth is derived from how much we can produce for others, or how much we can produce or have value to others, whether it is within the communal context or the larger societal context. And I think some of the things I know you also mentioned was reading and exercising and painting, just taking time off. I know some colleagues, especially during COVID, and when you have so many different variables, and some of us who do have the class privilege to work from home, um, and are also homeschooling children or attending to the needs of other family members, sometimes the only escape is to shut the door and take a couple of minutes to breathe, right? And that is self-care too. Um, yeah. uh, that kind of makes me think about how the individual is connected to the larger context, right? And to community especially. And I come from a collectivist society, which has its advantages and its drawbacks as well. And I know that you identify with various uh, communities that are collectivist. So I'm wondering what it is that we can um, draw into and draw from our communities to build them as safe spaces for each other.
Absolutely. I know I absolutely come from a collectivism type family. My mother and father, my mother's from Georgia and my father's from Florida. So they each have like 8 siblings. I have like 50 cousins all together, first cousins. And I explicitly remember growing up, and the first responsibility that you have is to your family. Is to make sure your mom is okay, your dad is okay, your siblings. And I've always felt somewhat of a responsibility, even as I live so far from them, to make sure that my family is okay, even though I'm the baby. And what I actually quickly learned though, and my mother actually was the one who taught that to me, is that you do have to take time for yourself. My mother was a single mother. She raised me, and I remember her cooking and cleaning and folding laundry and making sure everything was okay. But I also remember her going to her room and closing her door and being there for 30 minutes because she needed a break. And as a Black woman, I'm not a mother yet, but I know for my mother and for her sisters, there was the obligation to your family. You have to make sure your children are okay first. You have to make sure your husband, your spouse is okay first, and then you can rest. I think as a community, what we really need to start looking at is sharing the responsibilities. Um, Understanding that as a mother, you carry a kid for 9 months, then you're responsible for changing them and feeding them. And there are plenty of fathers out there that contribute to that and are active parts of it. And I think as a community, we all need to come together and understand everybody needs a break and respect that break, not invade that break, not make them feel less of a mother, less of a spouse. It's really important to reinforce and even encourage self-care, because I also know a lot of women who you'll tell them to self-care, but if you don't, I'll use my wife because I love her and I know she's watching. Before she started her meditation, I literally had to build her a room and say, listen, you need space to yourself. You need time to yourself. You have to take these moments because it'll make you a better person and it'll make our marriage way better. And when that happened, when she could reflect on her day without me in her face, like, what are you doing? It really did. It helped her find her own aspirations and what would guide her. So I think the main thing we really need to do is reinforce other people to have self-care and be supportive of it.
That is such a wonderful, and important point, Angel, because it is true. When we are not given by permission by society, and then we are not told that is how we can be there for each other, is to make sure that we reinforce over and over again and create that space to be able to, for our loved ones and for our community members to be able to make that and enjoy that space for themselves. Um, I also am thinking about people within our communities, right, who are on the margins or whose experiences are not considered central. How do we create? Part of self-care is feeling safe, right? how do we create within our community safe spaces for all community members? So, for example, when we think of community dialogues, one group of people I think that come to my mind, also because are people with disabilities, people with, or I think, uh, transgender and gender expansive people. In India, transgender and gender expansive people have been leading the movement for LGBTQI plus rights, right? For queer rights. And yet, the only options they have for employment are sex work and begging. And these are communities and community members that are creating making democracy stronger and fighting for rights that all of us, and particularly cisgender women, benefit from. And it is very true in the US as well, right? Some of the highest rates of homicide are against Black, Indigenous, and Latinx women of color. And so, how do we, when we talk about self-care at the community level, what do you, how do you think we can work towards creating that space where we honor the needs of all community members?
Yeah, and it's a hard answer because, you know, as Americans, we have so many diverse needs. And it is very hard for some groups of people to understand, and other groups of people, you know, need a different type of care and understanding because of their life experiences. The one thing that I've personally decided to do is create that space. Working with my wife and my friend Kyra, we created Erie's Black Wall Street, but that was with the intent to create a space for Black and Brown voices to feel safe, to feel honored, and to feel heard. I think that as a community, that's really all we can do, because I am very like sketch on building one thing that fits everybody. It just never works. And for myself as a Black lesbian, how I identify, it is just truthful that sometimes I do feel more comfortable in Black and Brown spaces with other queer people such as myself. And so as a community, I think we really just need to start acknowledging the diversity and giving those groups the opportunity and also the support to build their own spaces, so that they can decide where they feel safe and who they feel safe with.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question.
So I think we've kind of touched on this for a little bit in terms of the connection between colonialism and capitalism, imperialism, and the barriers that are created for self-care at the individual level, the ways in which we are socialized, but also in terms of barriers to health generally, and barriers to mental health and well-being specifically. Um, I think, could you speak a little more to the challenges and the barriers that people of color experience, or in the work that you've done, in your lived experiences that you're aware of?
As far as the barriers to access of the self-care and things like that, the one thing that I will say that I've noticed and I've experienced is our own lack of acknowledgement that we need the self-care. That's the first thing. And a lot of my friends, when we do talk about self-care, the assumption is what we've already seen in social media and what we've already seen on TV. That is the basis for social care. I think the education of our communities is our biggest barrier. Because once we have access to the potential that's out there, as Black and Brown people, we can excel if we have access to it. But it's not there. It's not in our purview because we are working. And I actually had a friend of mine, and I don't want to make this political, but they're voting for Trump, and it's fine. I'll swallow that. But they're voting for Trump, and basically their explanation was that if you want something in America, it doesn't matter what you look like, you work hard enough and you'll get it. And if you're not working hard, then you don't deserve it. And that takes me back to the capitalistic perspective of hard work does not equal wealth in America, because if it did, the descendants of slaves would be millionaires. It just, you know what I mean? Construction workers would be the wealthiest people in America, and not CEOs who sit in an office and go to 3 hours of meetings a day. I just truly believe that we really need to start assessing how we view capitalism, and capitalism versus our health, and what we need to be whole human beings. Because the focus on money, I think, does bring us into this realm where we don't have time to take a rest. And as Black and brown people, we are, like I said before, those essential workers making less than $15 an hour. But if we have a family, that means we're working 2 and 3 jobs. That means that we may not have the appropriate medical care. We may not have the insurance that will allow us to go to a therapist with an affordable copay. And here in Erie, the main thing I've seen is we may not have Black therapists to go to, because either we know them because we grew up together, or there aren't enough. So all of those factors kind of fall into being a person of color, and actually using self-care as a method to make us whole, stronger people.
You're absolutely right in that. Not just navigating, there are all of these internal barriers that we are socialized into, but the systemic barriers are very real in terms of even having access to competence or culturally competent services, right? Where you don't have to go and explain your experience and have to educate your service providers about your cultural context and your needs, or whether it's in the context of sexism or cis-sexism or racism or ableism, and you don't have to do that homework for them. And I guess that is part of also why it's easier to switch on Netflix for those of us who have access and tune out the rest of it for maybe half an hour, 1 hour. 10 hours when possible. And so I think all of the discussion we've had ahead of this, in terms of leaning on our loved ones to create that space, and creating that space for others in the community, is so important. And I think part of that is some of the work that you and Devana have also been doing in terms of macro practice, right? In terms of advocating for policy changes. And I think that ties in very much. Something I like to tell my students is we can heal one person at a time, but if we don't address the things that are causing the trauma, we are always going to be putting bandages. So absolutely. So I know we spoke some about this, but as a former university student, as a young person, what are some factors that have helped boost your resilience?
So the first thing I'd say is finding a tribe. I tell everybody that, find your tribe. I've had different tribes over my lifetime, but in college specifically, I found my tribe that actually they still hang out with me today. My best friend from college, I met her in 2007, and Devon and I her son is our godson, so we have a very close relationship. But I think my main tool for self-care in college was definitely that, having a place where I could speak my mind, speak my opinions, and sometimes we agreed, sometimes we didn't, but it was always welcomed. I didn't have to explain who I was. I didn't have to explain why I had this opinion. Finding my tribe was my first go-to. My second go-to was kind of going into my own head, and I had already done that. There's a lot of kids who do that now, but just imagining what my future is like and imagining what things could be. Sometimes just going into my own head was the best coping mechanism I had at the time. And it worked for self-care in the sense of removing my worries for the present moment. And that's my goal with self-care, because I'm a therapist. I work for the Bureau of Blindness and Vision Services. So almost every time I'm working with individuals in these minority groups, different minority groups, you know, whether it be disabled individuals, individuals with visual impairments, queer individuals, youth. And I think that for me, I think what they all kind of relate on is the idea that a lot of them have not found the space where they feel comfortable. And it's hard to relinquish all the stress and anxieties and things we have if we're always holding in what we have to say and what we think. And for me, I think that's number one for college students. Find a group that you trust, that you're okay being around, and that makes you feel safe.
So, I think what I took away from what you're saying is the importance of connection with oneself and the importance of connection with those who can hold and create safe space for you. Would you mind sharing with us some of the different spaces that you found your tribe in, or your group of safe people in, as you've navigated adult life and professional life?
Absolutely. So my freshman and sophomore year in college, I actually hung out with a group of girls. They all identified as lesbian, and none of them were people of color. They were all white, and I actually think I related to them closely because I was like on the brink of coming out. So I was I was gay, and I hadn't kind of accepted that about myself. So I gravitated towards them. For the first 2 years of college, you know, it was just being in a space where I could observe potentially what my life would be like if I decided to come out, if I decided to be myself. The experience I had with them was amazing. I mean, we did everything from a fake prom where we went to the Salvation Army and dressed up and asked people out on dates. And that was actually one of the first times where I asked a woman out on a date to a prom. And so it was just that environment that was like, this is okay. Just do what you want. We're going to have a good time. And that was the first tribe that I found. The second tribe, my best friend Lauren, who we're still friends now, and that tribe was completely people of color. It was inner city kids from Pittsburgh, for the most part, who were very like up on the type of music and the type of style. But I was embraced, my Blackness was embraced when I met her. And she kind of reinforced the fact that you can be a lesbian and you can be a gay Black woman. You can be all those things at once and still be significant and important. And our relationship just developed from there. And the next tribe I found was actually my wife. And I had known her before. She ignored me because I was a little bit of a douchebag in college, and that's fine. But when I got into my graduate program, I ran into her again, and her mindset was so much and so similar to mine. The feeling of feeling kind of like an outcast, but knowing that you have something to offer, and we just connected. From there, we started to build our friendship network, and that's when Kyra came into the picture, and we decided that Erie was not supporting who we were as Black women. And we were like, we're going to change that. Let's do that. And so right now, I mean, my tribe is beautiful. I mean, shout out to one of my best friends, Nat. I mean, Alex, Kate, Kyra, my wife, like those people, they keep me sane in an otherwise like chaotic space. But even when I look at my tribe now, reflecting on it, my tribe now is so diverse. It is so diverse. It is not stuck in one box. It's not just lesbians. It's not just Black people. It's not like we have a very beautiful circle that we've created, and it's it's extraordinary. It's amazing.
I'm really so happy just to hear, and I wish that for every human being.
Me too. I truly do, because it's not a good thing to kind of have to feel like you're walking through life alone. Nobody should feel that way.
Would you mind sharing some of the ways you've learned or you've had to learn to create healthy boundaries? Because I think that is one of the areas, that is one of the things you either learn from your family or you learn as you navigate life. And particularly if you have multiple, if you you live through multiple intersections of marginalized identities. And so some of the things perhaps that have been helpful for you to say to yourself or know to maintain those and create those healthy boundaries around people, around ideas that have been expressed to you or about you.
Absolutely. I would say that I first learned boundaries at a really late age. And I actually learned it dealing with my family. Because as I was coming out, I didn't have necessarily the best response from all of my family. My dad was okay with it, you know. So what I had to really learn to do is accept who I was and say that my thoughts, my feelings, and my wants in life are just as valid as the people who have whatever say so they have on my life. And with that, I really learned that sometimes you do have to turn the noise off. And that was my creation of boundaries, my creation of there are things that I will talk about you and talk about with you, and there are things that are off limits. There are opinions that I will take from people, and there are opinions that I don't want from you because they're hurtful to me. And as I grew, I started to deal with more interactions, especially living in Erie as a Black gay woman. There's not a lot of us that are open out and all over the place. Like I go wherever I want in Erie because that's what we should be able to do. But I've been met with a lot of, especially from my own community, just kind of a pushback on the identification of being gay, being a lesbian. And that's where my barriers were reinforced because at that point, when these things are happening, I don't not only have to protect myself and my feelings, but at that point I had a wife and I had to protect her and her feelings. And so there needed to be boundaries created for who and what had access to our inner circle. I created those boundaries, like I said, by number one, speaking my mind, and number two, being very clear to others about what is acceptable and isn't acceptable. And most of the time, you can only do that when the situation arises. So the biggest takeaway I would say from building my boundaries is I learned to stand up for myself. And it was just that simple. When I learned to stand up for myself and say, nah, I'm good. That's your opinion. I'm going to move on from that. It really became easier to not only just be myself, but be happy with who I was because I could disregard those other kind of outlooks.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think very often we don't think of boundaries as important to self-care, and the experiences you've shared and the insights you've shared, I think really highlight how important self-care boundaries really are to self-care, and creating and being able to enjoy a safe space for ourselves. So I think this next bit is also keeping in mind that there might be some students who are also watching. And I'm wondering if you have some advice for students of color and students in other marginalized intersections of identities. And I think to some extent you have addressed this, but how can we protect their mental and emotional well-being when they are inevitably going to be exposed to supremacy, ignorance, forms of violence like microaggressions that add cumulative stress to people with marginalized identities?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say to that, and I believe we had a conversation, you and I, kind of along the lines of what can a professor do in that aspect. And for me, I feel that if you are a university that houses a diverse population of students, it is your institution's job to make the staff and the faculty as diverse. Because one of the best ways not the best ways, one of the most effective ways to get a student to open up, to share with you, is to have something in relation to that student. And I can say from my experience, all my advisors were white females, which is, they did great at their jobs, but at the end of the day, there were things I was going through that they would not be able to relate to. And if we want our students to be safe and feel safe at school and to take care of their mental health and to take care of themselves as far as eating and all of those things, then we need to create a welcoming environment in which they can do that. When you look at your professors and you're telling them, hey, I'm having a problem because, I don't know, my mom's having an issue raising my little sister, something like that, that compassion does need to be there for the different cultural aspects of that student. And I feel like if you can't support that as a university, you really need to reflect on your hiring, you need to reflect on your training and your education of the people that are working in those institutions.
I know your educational background is in I'm sorry, can you remind me again what you
Psychology and rehab counseling. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, thinking back, do you find that uh, you're content in your courses, the content that you were?
No. To be quite frank, I got through college because before I went to college, my mom said you need to finish college. But the environment in the classes, I think I said this in a panel discussion I had before, I have not had a Black professor probably until my junior year. It was a women's studies professor. And then I had also Dr. Umeme Sababo, and he was good because he did the turbulent 70s. But as a whole, when I walked into class, I felt very little connection to the professors. In my psychology program, if I'm not mistaken, there were only 2 African American students. And in my master's program, in the specific rehab program, there were only 2 African American women that were in it. My personal experience, like I said, I was able to get through it because I understood there was a process, there was an ends to a means. But it wasn't necessarily a safe space. It wasn't necessarily a place where I could truly vocalize how I felt because I identify as a Black feminist. And so when you're sitting in class and you're hearing these things and they're asking you questions and your answer is going to be so complex that the teacher's going to tell you to be quiet, it makes it difficult to process that little bit of information, knowing that it relates to such a larger subject, such a larger context. I will say the most comfortable I've ever felt though was in my master's program with Dr. Packard, and she is a white female as well, but she was the first person to really acknowledge that I was a tri-minority and say it in a manner that was proud. She's like, you belong to these 3 different intersectionalities. You should be very proud, and you're doing this and you're doing that. And she made me feel seen in the process of learning. And that was, like I said, my last year in my graduate program. So, my experience at Edinboro, although I had found my tribe outside of classes, inside of classes, it severely lacked diversity and inclusion. I remember being kicked out of a class by one of my professors, and it was because I was dealing with my grandmother dying from cancer and I wouldn't get off of my phone. And rather than conversing with me, she kicked me out of class and I got a D for that semester. So I got a B the next time though, so we're good.
I'm sorry, that was your experience, and that was not very trauma-informed, nor not very informed about the context in which we can learn. You cannot learn when one is hurting so much and in a state of crisis.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I've been reflecting quite a bit as well on what we as educators can do to create more inclusive classrooms. Because one of the things that I've been very cognizant of is that most of my students tend to be white, cisgender women who identify as heterosexual, and who have largely grown up either in rural or suburban communities, or with very little exposure to, because I think Americans generally tend to live in silos, right? So, anyways, point is that one of the ways that I think I've tried to address and minimize the kind of experience that you have had is by ensuring that the content that, and I know my colleagues in the social work department are doing something similar, is ensuring that the content that the resources that we provide our students are representative, our voices, our writings and thoughts and stories of people uh, with various intersections of identities, right? And the other, and I think you and I spoke about this some, is just as we try and tell our social work students, it is not the responsibility of the clients to educate uh, them. It is not the responsibility of a student with minority intersectional identities to educate either other classmates or the educator, right? And I think that really speaks to the experience that the positive experience that you mentioned that you had where you felt seen and where you could be the student and not have to um, speak less.
Yes.
We could speak I could quite honestly speak for us together.
Yeah. We've talked for hours before.
uh, I wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit about the difference between being an ally and being an accomplice.
So the word ally has been used a lot, especially now that we're in this. This is like reminiscent of the 70s for me, what we're kind of going through. And for me, ally means a friend, somebody who understands. You know, they understand what you're going through. So how I view it is my next door neighbor, if my house is on fire, they understand my house is on fire and they feel bad for my house being on fire. They might even call 911 for me. An accomplice is someone who knows my house is on fire and will make sure that I am not in that house on fire. They will not only call the police, they will come help you. I always, well, Dr. Matthews actually kind of clarified that for us when we were getting to work on Erase Black Wall Street. And she was like, an accomplice is someone who puts their body in harm's way to protect that group of people, that person. And it really resonated with me because I do have friends who, I went to a predominantly white school, all girls Catholic school, so you already know that it's probably not the most diverse, but diverse. And I was friends with every single person in my class. There were 54 people. Now that we're adults, I see so many of them that are very vicious towards minority groups, towards people that are different than them. That's the difference between an ally and an accomplice. And I think that it's really important that we differentiate when allies and accomplices are trying to help our communities, they need to clarify who they are to us. And we also need to acknowledge it as well and understand that although someone may understand your plight, do they empathize with it and will they help you fight? Are they fighting for the same change you're fighting for? Or are they just saying, yeah, I understand that change needs to happen? And that's kind of different.
Yeah, that I think is also related to the difference between being woke and wanting to be perceived as woke, right? Yeah. So, you know, when we talk about self-care and the importance of practice, I always think about also, I remember this conversation with my friends where I got very annoyed when we were talking about mindfulness, and I lashed out at them and I said, you can't meditate yourself out of oppression. So in that context, we cannot self-care ourselves out of oppression. So what is the role of accomplices who have more privileged positions within the social, political, economic hierarchy? within our societies to create that space. I didn't know if I lost you in the question because that was a lot.
No. I know exactly what you're asking because we've actually experienced that already with Erie's Black Wall Street. You know, we created this as a group of women of color, Black women, and we got our nonprofit, all of that stuff. We did that independently, and even my wife's campaign, it was a campaign run of all women, which a lot of people don't know. All women of color helped her kind of get to that space. And so for me, I think that the job of the accomplice is exactly what you said, which is to secure that safe space for us if you have it. One of the examples I can give is Hannah Kirby. And I believe she owns Emerald Forge, if I'm not mistaken. But Alex, so one of our friends, she did a pop-up shop. And one of the things Hannah said, she said, well, how can I be of help? What can I bring to this situation? And so what she decided was she has a coffee shop. Let me bring you guys coffee. You can get free coffee out to everybody. And one of the things she said was, well, I'm not going to stay because this isn't my space. This isn't my space to be. This is your event. This is your environment. And I respected that because she wanted to help, but she didn't want to be invasive. And for me, that's the key to having that privilege in the world that we live in. I have an immense amount of privilege, even with the number of titles that I live with. But I understand that although my life is a certain way, that doesn't mean that everybody that looks like me is experiencing the same privileges. So it is my job with that privilege to speak up and to build a space for those who can't do it for themselves. And so in essence, I feel like that's the job of the accomplice, because if I'm doing it, I'm already in the thick of the fight. You have this privilege to help. Don't be invasive, but help.
Yeah, you said it perfectly, and I think that you tied it right into where I was taking the conversation next is how do we use our own privileges or the privileges that we embody and enjoy to be accomplices, right? And I'm so grateful that you made time for this conversation. I hope you joined by a good audience, and I'm sure there'll be questions. But Angel, I've been going on and asking you so many questions. If you have anything to share that I haven't asked about, or if you'd like to ask anything, please, I cede this space to you.
I mean, I think you did such a good job, Shraddha, in working on this. You you made sure to ask the questions that, I think are important to people. I mean, for me, I guess my question would be for you. What do you do for self-care? And, you are actually teaching students. So from your perspective, what do you do to prepare yourself to help other Black and brown people that are like yourself?
I think a lot of the questions that we formulated came from the challenges that I'm aware of as well, being socialized to put everybody else's needs before my own, feeling guilty for not being, and shame for not being productive, having grown up in a capitalist society and living in one. And so I actually remember, and I know we spoke about this, that as children we were much better, and children tend to be much better at self-care than adults. And I think part of that was challenging the narrative that I'm not good at self-care, or that I'm not deserving, or that I have to do X, Y, and Z before I can earn the right to do some self-care. And part of my self-care is sometimes just taking a minute to express gratitude for the things that I have in life, or the people, the love that sustain me and nourish me. Sometimes it is watching Netflix and zoning out. Sometimes it's listening. Sometimes it's listening to music that I like, people who inspire me. Sometimes it is connecting to my family, who I haven't seen in 3 years now, and probably won't see for another 2 years. So, because they're all based in India. And part of it is really just I think my favorite self-care activity is taking the time to be present with my stepkids and just hearing them laugh and hearing their stories and just being present. And I feel really comfortable. It's a, thank you. With regards to my students, there are a couple of things that I try and keep in mind, especially, and this is something that I hasn't come out of my brilliant mind. It's something that I have learned from my colleagues and speaking with them as well, which is uh, we have a large MSW program. We have a lot of adult learners. I said learners who have full-time jobs, who are caregivers for young children or older adults. Some students have multiple jobs, of first responders, um, and so and we try and use a trauma-informed lens, but we also try, so one of the tools that we use is providing late passes in our class. The students have a certain number of late passes that they can use towards submission of an assignment without getting penalized for it. Uh, the other thing, like I mentioned, was I try and ensure that I've got resources and that are representative of various intersections of identities, not just speaking about, but as authors and as creators of knowledge and content and perspectives, right? Um, and the last bit, I think, is really being mindful of both acknowledging, but also I guess what centering experiences of people with marginalized intersections of identities. So what lens are we using in our analysis and in our work? And I think hopefully that I have found that, Angel, I found that from the time I first started teaching to where I am now, 5 years into my teaching career, the more inclusive my content has gotten, the more inclusive my classes have become, the more comfortable students with multiple intersections of multiple identities are about sharing their experiences. Um, yeah, so that's my long answer to your question.
Well, and that's amazing because I think, the most important part of college for me was, I hate to say it, it wasn't the academic perspective, it was learning about different aspects of life and different perspectives. And I think that when you allow students to share their different experiences, you really are helping the next generation become more open to the fact that we are a diverse country. There's no way around it. Like, there's every type of person here that you can think of. And a lot of my friends, their first experience with a gay person, with a Black person, with a transgender person, was sitting in a college classroom. So that in itself is an amazing tool to use in your classroom. So thank you for that. Yes.
So I'm going to see if Haley can join us, and perhaps Chris can join us too. I think.
There we go.
Hello.
We're back. Great discussion. I've been sitting along taking notes too. I think it's great. And I think Angelica, what you were talking about with Hannah and the coffee shop, yeah, they've always been very supportive of all sorts of initiatives. So that was kind of nice that you gave them a shout out too. They also make a really good cup of coffee. So that's beside the point too. And also, I mean, I don't fit a lot of the titles of this presentation. I'm not BIPOC, I'm not a licensed therapist, but I always found that coffee and going to a shop or like just taking a time out of your day to have a warm beverage or something is huge. So I really appreciate all of your discussion about self-care. And even though this discussion was geared more towards BIPOC or BIPOC women, a lot of the steps and a lot of the ideas that you talked about can really help, the wider audience. But it's also very important that we do talk about BIPOC women because that's a segment of the population that's always under highlighted when it comes to these sorts of issues. So I think what's next is if Haley, if you'd like to share some of the resources that you brought and some of your perspective from a licensed social worker?
Hi. So basically, I just wanted students to know and just people to know what's available to them in general, and that, you know, the Gearing Health and Wellness Center, sometimes people don't always think about us because it's like in the McNerney building, and sometimes we look kind of dark and hidden like a bat cave, but we do exist. And we have actually pretty flexible hours because we're open till 10 p.m., including weekends. So sometimes students aren't aware of that as well. But we have both medical and mental health services for students, which is really nice. So, I mean, gosh, if you're feeling sick or if you're in a crisis, you can come to us at any time. The best part, you know, since this conversation is about being more diverse and culturally competent, is that we both have medical and mental health staff that have a variety of different backgrounds. Skin color wise, you know, there might be some limitations, if I'm going to be honest. And you look at me, I'm very glaringly white, very Caucasian, but I don't try to hide that. And I'm pretty honest with students and upfront about that. But, you know, we worked with international students, transgender population, LGBTQIA population, everyone. It's nice because they all have different areas of expertise and background. All of us are licensed clinicians. We have to get continuing education credits to continue to be culturally diverse. We worked in different areas, and we all have licensure to maintain as well. So I just want students to know, at least like that, if you're coming to us, it's a safe space, which we also actually have a legitimate safe space because we do have the pink triangle, and we do get training for safe zone training yearly as well. So just so that students and staff are aware of that. You know, you can, even staff and faculty reach out to us at times if there's, I think, you know, there's been some, I know, bad experiences mentioned too at Embro with what we were talking about prior, but I think positive now is it's gotten a lot better in terms of faculty and staff reaching out to us and just everyone getting more interconnected. If a student's like even feeling depressed, we've had faculty and staff reach out to us so that, you know, we can just check in on the students, see what's going on, offer them help if they need it. We have something called the care team. So even if anyone can use this, and I can show it on the website later if you guys would like, but if anyone is stuck about what to do, or even if they want to put in something anonymous and they're like, I don't want to get involved, but maybe I'm just worried about a student or someone, it's a 24/7 thing. So you can put in this form online. It comes through an email to everyone on the team, and we will react to it and check up on whoever is having issues of concern. So just so you guys know, that also is available to people. Another thing is, you know, on the CAP side for the mental health services, again, everyone's pretty diverse and experienced, but we even have things like peer educators who are students themselves. They get trained in being more diverse. They sit in on things. They help promote events. Gearing also does a bunch of events on campus, and we really try to collab with different departments like social work, hearing and speech, like just pretty much anyone and everything, because we're all trying to really keep connected and make it so that students feel more comfortable as well. So we've done things like Stories Over Silence, which was a mental health based day. It was based on the World Prevention Suicide Day, but we made it so it was really focused on self-care. So it was really nice because last year, you know, obviously before COVID, we had a bunch of things all over campus. We had other agencies come from the Erie community just so that students and staff and faculty knew what was available for them to use. And we promoted a lot of different self-care activities, things they can do, fun little activities. We had succulents, rock climbing wall. This year we had to do it virtually, so it was a little bit different. I think the one positive though, with the virtual things, although people get really burnt out, is that at least in terms of diversity, from what I've noticed, is that sometimes like a student needs like a therapist that maybe, you know, they need someone long-term or more intensive therapy. Now that things are offered virtually, it's kind of nice because you can kind of see more diversity, or if we're looking for someone in particular as a therapist, like you guys mentioned, like, hey, maybe I don't want to meet with no offense, but like an older white male. Maybe I would identify more with meeting with someone younger or African American. You can actually look and find people now And virtually, it's kind of awkward more now. So that's kind of a positive, and students don't have to be alone in finding out those materials either, or finding out how to get connected, because we can help them with that. The only other thing I want to say too is, we also will help parents and family, because we have tons of parenting resources, and we do have actually a parenting room as well. Right now it's being used as like kind of the COVID area, but typically it would be, so if like a mother needed to come and breastfeed, there's a little safe area for them to do that in. There's a refrigerator, some children's books, and a bunch of different things too. We also had a meditation room that was open to students, and we also have a self-care room at Hearing, so that if a student needs to say like over-the-counter medications, maybe they don't want to necessarily see a nurse, that's available to them. And that still is, even with the pandemic right now, it just looks a little bit different. And there's also tons of resources in there, anything from drug and alcohol things, homelessness. So that's also available to students. And we actually collaborate with agencies that come to the Gearing Health and Wellness Center too, such like as, Cadenza, if you're having drug and alcohol issues, instead of you having transportation issues where you have to go all the way to Erie, you can come and meet with Cadenza right here on campus. We have Safe Journey, we have SafeNet. We did have AA meetings. Obviously right now it looks a little bit different, but we can still find, if you needed those things, there's always different options. There's virtual things, some people are doing in person. If you're having food insecurities, feel free to come over. If you needed a hygiene concern or had issues with that, if you're facing homelessness or potentially might be homeless, I think Edinboro is here to help you, and you can always pop by, call us, stop in anytime. So I just wanted you guys to know that you're not alone. There's always a safety net, and anytime you're having like any moment, you're always free and available to come over.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing all of those resources. I think what you mentioned about telehealth and being able to connect with mental health service providers that may be better positioned to understand and meet the needs, specific needs that some of our students might have is such. I think it's one of the blessings to come out of this pandemic, of the very few that there are. Could you share a little more about some of the virtual self-care sessions that you're organizing, or virtual events for mental health that you're?
So we did do Stories Over Silence in a virtual format this year. It was kind of like a bingo card, and if students did like a certain amount of events, and we had all sorts of different things, you could win prizes and stuff. So we're still trying to actively do things like that. On the CAPS side of things for counseling, they're always continuing to do many events, whether that's certain focuses in populations or not. If it wasn't during the pandemic, we would also have like kind of pet therapy time where the service animals kind of come, you can pet them. There's all sorts of different ones, from like corgis to big dogs, big floofers. But we have different things ongoing right now, like even Halloween time. What do you do during this time now? Because you can't really see people, you shouldn't be rather. And sometimes you just need kind of a break and self-care. Maybe we just want to eat some candy and relax, but maybe we still want to connect to some social interactions too. So we do have some little events going on like that. We're working with Art Therapy Studio, and we're doing an event on the 30th. It's going to be like a Halloween kind of watch party with Hocus Pocus. There'll be some costume contests, just kind of connecting with people and talking with them, and then doing a little prize at the end. And then we're going to be doing something similar to during the week before, a little mini Halloween event as well. We plan on doing some other events in the future, like a Pokemon Go walk, and dressing up as trainers, and Pokemon Go is making a comeback, which I'm very excited for, because that is one positive thing for the pandemic. And perhaps we can do some Animal Crossing friend code trade-offs too. We have some other events planned before the pandemic hit, and we're hoping to be creative. We were going to work with the state prison in Albion and maybe having inmates talk with students about hope, because there's a really wonderful group there called Inside Out that most of the inmates there are lifelong term inmates. And if they can find hope within their own setting and with the possibility of never going out into the community again, how can we maintain hope, especially with everything that seems kind of hopeless right now in 2020. So we have constant kind of initiatives ongoing and different events planned, and we're always open for feedback. And I know everyone is truly burnt out from social media, but we're always bugging students on social media if they have any ideas or suggestions. So I'm looking at you students, if you have anything too, let us know. So we're more than willing to do it.
That's fantastic. I think one of the hardest things about the pandemic is the loss of social connection. And I think there are a lot of events that you described that really kind of fill in the gap over there. I had one question, but I didn't write it down, so I can't remember. But where is it that, is there a clearinghouse for this information that students can access?
Yeah, basically, if you have any questions, you can, number one, always call us. I know there's a lot of anxiety. Now I'm getting a little bit better during the pandemic, that too noticed. But you can also email me, an email or health center email. It's literally just healthcenter@enbro.edu. We have actually listed on the Enbro website, if you look up student health services or CAPS, you can find all the information there. We also have a list of just other resources available as well. Some for Erie, local hospitals, different things like that too. So, and if you just needed just any information, even if you didn't want to personally meet with me, obviously I would not be affected by that. I can also just send you some information too, if you ever need help.
Actually, Haley, I have two more things to ask you about. I think you made a really important point about resources for students who may be experiencing food insecurity and houselessness. Could you kind of share with us what the process for outreach or who they could reach out to and what kind of assistance would be available to students who may be experiencing these issues?
So in terms of food insecurities in the past, we did have food bags available for students that could come at any time and pick it up, including hygiene bags. Right now that's still being worked on because some changes had been made. And I'm also aware that the social work department actually has some things available for students. And there is actually an area in Pogue too where students can come and pick up some food. Right now, I can't say for certain in terms of what specifically is going to happen with that, because it's a work in progress, but just know that there will be active efforts made towards that. There's also a Enbro just community food kitchen or bank also located on campus as well in Powers, and that is open on Thursdays. So if a student or anyone just needed getting assistance to there, we can guide them and direct them to that. There's also, if you were located in Erie or otherwise, and maybe you just needed some information about, hey, I can't even afford to get groceries this week and stuff. There are plenty of places available and around that can be sent to you. And if there are transportation issues, sometimes we can find some different ways to work around that as well. Not only, I know Uber and Lyft don't really like to come to Enbro because it's quite a ways out of the way, but there are some other options just so that people are aware of that.
Fantastic. So if there are students who are experiencing food insecurities, houselessness, you can get in touch with you with CAPS to get more information on and I'm guessing, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be confidentiality maintained. So if they have any concerns about privacy, that's something that you all can address as well.
Yep. In terms of confidentiality, we follow HIPAA law. So obviously we're not going to be spreading any information or telling anyone. Even if someone calls a health center, if the student's worried, like even if you're worried about your parent calling to find information, they're not going to be getting any information unless you specifically sign a release of information with us stating what we can and cannot tell. an individual and who, it's not going anywhere. So everything's completely confidential and private in terms of medical and mental health in general.
Thank you, Lily. I remember something that Michelle Obama said to a group of women in Indonesia when she was talking about leadership and taming spaces, and that is that we need to plan our joy. And I think that is very much in line with what we are talking about self-care, that self-care is something that has to be planned and protected, the time and the space. And I think it's okay to do that. And it's not only okay, it's necessary. And it's not only necessary, it is radical. It's radical self-love.
Right, well, it looks like you covered all the topics we were going to discuss for today, and I haven't seen any new questions come in, so I guess with that, we're right about 2 o'clock time. About an hour and a half. I think everything's gone great. I think we had a lot of good discussion. Thank you, Haley, for all the resources, and Angelica and Strada for all your insight and all your tips. All right, welcome back. I think, Angelica, since you're joining us here, I did have one question to ask you. Since that was recorded in October, have you noticed any big changes since then? Anything that you've been able to find that's helped you with your self-care or help you with the social aspect of the pandemic, or are some of the things that you did that you mentioned in that video, have you just been kind of able to develop?
I pretty much have been working on doing all of those things, but I've added in just trying things that I haven't done before. A couple weeks ago, we went and got a cabin and went snowboarding. So I'm kind of branching out just because, those things can get mundane sitting in the house. You run out of books sometimes that you actually are interested in. And when that winter hits, you don't necessarily want to be outside. So I have been practicing those things, but for the most part, just trying to find new things as well to keep me busy and sane.
Well, very good. Yeah, I think that kind of concludes our program today. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we close today?
No, thank you again just for having me. And it was great to watch that and reflect on it. So thank you again, Chris. And it was great seeing you.
Yeah, it was nice to see how things have progressed even since October. So there were a lot of great things you touched upon too, and hopefully a lot of people have taken some good self-care techniques from it. So once again, Angelica, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll be back soon with more